Audio check. Okay, it's 1:30. The inquiry is now resumed. Do we have just checking, we've got Miss Sutherland. I can see a name there. Hi, Miss Sutherland. I'll come to you in a second. Just one procedural point before we start. Mr. Henderson, your team has indicated that tomorrow you intend to cross-examine Mr. Witchells for 4 hours. Is that a typo?
It's not, sir. It was because of the uncertainty about what information is going to be provided in the run-up to the inquiry. So
right.
You obviously heard the back and forth about what we do and don't have. We hope it's going to be less than that, much more in the order of 3 hours, like you've had before.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, sir. And I did run under with Mr. Collins to try and move things on, and we'll try and do the same tomorrow so far as we can.
Yeah, myself, Mr. Ware had a brief chat, and the issues are narrow. Your witness hasn't adduced any positive evidence. In view of that, 4 hours is patently excessive.
I hear what you're saying.
I think 3 hours is the upper limit, I think, of what would be acceptable. So if you could try and adhere to that, we would be appreciative.
Of course, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Sutherland.
Sir.
Good afternoon.
I propose to deal with this in a very similar way to Mr. Renshaw.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you not hear me? Yeah, you look like you couldn't hear me then. In that I'll just give a brief overview. I don't intend to read my proof of evidence out. I'm sure it's been read. And then some comments. And then obviously we can move to cross-ex. Sir, my proof was drafted in relation to both the Greenbelt and the parking matters, and these were not divided up within the proof of evidence, because obviously that was prior to the decision to do things in the way that we have. So what I've attempted to do is pick out the key points that I would like to draw to the inspector's attention. So there are 5 key points that it might be useful to note down. The first and largest of those is the lack of an ASAS. We have got an old ASAS, it's out of date, it's sitting there, and that was part of my concern, is the fact that at no stage, despite having a 2-year run-up to this inquiry, has the airport carried out a review and started proposing a draft ASAS that is going to actually tackle the problems that they are facing. So it's incredibly premature to submit an application of this nature with such a large development proposed without having carried out the work beforehand to support it. And so that's one of my key concerns, is why have the airport proposed this scheme without having done the work behind it, so that an agreed ASAS is in place and demonstrates the points that we're all now arguing about. My second point, sir, is in relation to the lack of assessment of off-airport car parking. Throughout the documentation, and there's quite a lot of it from Mr. Witchells, from Mr. Collins, there's lots of reference to off-airport car parking. And I don't want to move over into the Greenbelt argument at all, but essentially the airport are asking us to take their word that they have assessed off-airport car parking, and that what they submit in relation to off-airport car parking is correct. I have evidence that what they're saying is not correct, and I have produced that evidence. One of the main parts of the airport's case is the fact that off-airport car parking is either unauthorised, unofficial, inappropriate, damaging to the environment, and a whole range of other detrimental factors. At no point has anybody considered the fact that there are a range of airport operators out there, that the majority of them operate using lawful means, permitted development rights that allow them to use their land for, at the moment, up to 56 days a year, but generally 28 days a year. continued reference by all parties to unauthorised off-airport car parking being a significant problem means that the inspectors need to understand there are a whole range of airport car parkers out there. They pay tax, they pay their staff properly, they have well set up operations, they are lawful, and they operate perfectly lawfully. None of this has been assessed by the airport. In this regard, sir, I draw your attention to my Appendix 4 to my proof of evidence. So this is a document that was produced by North Somerset Council in 2015 as part of ongoing review of policy as to how to deal with off-airport car parking. I don't intend to read the whole document to you, sir, but I draw your attention to it for several reasons. In particular, and unfortunately it's not got numbered paragraphs, which doesn't help us terribly, but on the first page, if you go down to the third paragraph and the last, the third section and the last paragraph, the quote there says, the provision of off-airport parking could undermine the SAS and will be resisted. It's also desirable in terms of containing its impact on the openness of the green belt. So the document continues and shows how the policy has progressed. And as a reasonable reading of it demonstrates that the whole idea of preventing off-airport car parking was in order to protect the green belt. The basic premise of this work, sir, was that the airport should, wherever possible, provide parking on site within the inset in order not to have an inappropriate and adverse effect on the green belt. And it developed further to say that off-airport car parking in the green belt would have an adverse impact and that it would be in contravention of the ASAS, or the SAS as it was then. This document was created in 2015. Since then, there have been numerous attempts by the local authority to raise issues in relation to off-airport car parking as an aspect of enforcement, rather than looking at whether or not appropriate off-airport car parking could be provided, thereby relieving the airport of their significant concern as to how to manage their parking demand. None of the documents that I've seen show any consideration of park and ride by the airport or the council, although I reference JLTP4. And in JLTP4, sir, it specifically sets out, alongside discussion of the mass transport system that we've been hearing about from the transport consultants, that park and ride is something that should be looked into. Park and ride has not been looked into, and policy has not progressed since that 2015 review to consider how the needs of the airport in terms of parking demand can be appropriately met. My third point, sir, is the impact on local communities. You will have received an email yesterday from Liam Fox, MP for the area, expressing his significant concern that at present, regardless of whether it's in an inset or in the open green belt, so nothing to do with the green belt argument, the number of vehicles going to and from the airport across the rural lanes of North Somerset are adversely affecting the local community. You've heard from members of the local community about just how awful this impact is. And although I wasn't present for it, I'm sure you've heard about air quality and matters in relation to that. Of key concern for me in this matter is that there has been significant discussion about highway impact in terms of queuing, in terms of congestion, and all of it has been centred on the fact that people need to travel to the airport. It's my view that off-airport car parking is something that ought to be encouraged in non-green belt areas in order to properly deal with the demand that the airport are demonstrating. Finally, sir, I have a severe concern in relation to the justification of the airport for the need for low-cost car parking. There are several strings to this concern. The first is that I agree with Mr. Renshaw in relation to the fact that low-cost parking is not what is solely being promoted by the airport, and their reference to the fact that low-cost demand is such that they can only use surface parking instead of the multi-storey car parks is, in my view, inappropriate. I also agree with Mr. Renshaw in relation to his comments on phasing and the fact that the airport do not have a good track history of delivering what they say they will deliver to achieve the sustainable parking that they say they wish to achieve. Phasing, and I note that you made reference to condition 9 in the proposed conditions, and I would reiterate the points made by Mr. Renshaw in this regard. Where there is going to be phasing such that parking demand is to be considered sustainable on the airport site, that phasing must be delivered. The airport did not deliver it. They delivered the low-cost parking, the easy-to-deliver parking, and then they put off delivery of the MSCP. As was noted, it was late being delivered by some 4 years. Again, we have a condition suggesting phasing, but this phasing again suggests MSCP2 can come later. They should be able to expand onto the seasonal car parking before delivery. Again, this was never envisaged. There's a lack of control of the airport's expansion in terms of its parking, and there has been no substantive overview undertaken. Hence my first point in relation to the lack, and this is substantive, of an appropriate ASAS in support of this scheme. So, sir, I would just take you to a couple of points within my proof of evidence to make some of the points more forcefully in relation to my concerns. So, at para 5 of my proof of evidence, I finished with the fact that Bristol is the largest airport in the UK without a rail or mass transit link, without direct access to a motorway, and even without dual carriageway access to the airport. One of the biggest issues arising is the impact on local people living in the A roads and in villages surrounding the airport, and the number of vehicle movements generated by the airport. Local plan policy supports a monopoly for the airport by requiring all airport parking provision off-site to be acceptable only in association with hotel or overnight stay provision. That may be policy, sir, but that's not what's happening, because the use of permitted development rights to deliver off-airport car parking is delivering on the airport's own numbers approximately 20% of the parking need for the airport. That's a substantial number of parking being delivered outside of policy constraints. If off-airport car parking were delivered appropriately without impact on the green belt, this situation would not occur. The LPA were asked to consider off-airport car parking provision by a local parish council, Backwell Parish Council, in March 2020. there is significant concern locally that the airport holds a monopoly that is prejudicial to the local rural economy. The LPA have committed to reviewing off-airport car parking provision, but no such review has taken place. I've had confirmation in writing from Mr. Kent that the council intend to look into this in relation to the new draft local plan, but for the moment, reliance can only be placed on JLTP4. So there's been some discussion about JLTP4, and it clearly sets out that mass transit or park and ride is going to be one of the only solutions in the longer term. For that reason, sir, I consider it's premature of the airport to be making an application of the sort that they've made without considering all of the strategic policy and whether or not park and ride facilities would be appropriate. And so that's setting aside my greenbelt argument on sequential testing, which no doubt we'll come to in a couple of weeks' time. In relation to the 2012 passenger survey, the CAA passenger survey indicated right back in 2012 that between 5 and 10% of passengers are using off-airport car parking. BAL state in their study that there is a reduction in the proportion of customers who use unauthorised off-site providers with the construction of additional car park capacity. This is touted as if it is some sort of massive improvement, and I note that BAL reference a package of measures which will help to reduce these problems. The only concern in relation to off-airport car parking is that effectively it undercuts the airport's parking. And as we know, sir, the airport's parking income makes up a very large percentage of the airport's income. It's difficult in such circumstances for the airport to make a reasonable and justified determination of how best to reduce their own income. For me, the fact that the ASAS has not been updated and has not considered a whole range of alternatives is demonstrative of the fact that this is not in the airport's interests. In the parking demand study at CD 2.11, the justification for low cost car parking is based on two factors. One, passenger preference, and two, that it's more practical for the airport. For more practical, I consider what the airport is saying is cheaper to put down, cheaper to deliver, and quicker to obtain the income. Whilst I understand that economic assessment is appropriate in relation to determining whether or not something can come forward, the cost of car parking on the airport is solely under their control. It is their choice whether to choose to deliver low cost, high cost, premium cost, or indeed to look at whether or not they could deliver a cost lower than off-airport car parking. If the airport really do want to stop off-airport car parking, then they would need to work with those car parking operators, particularly those that operate lawfully, such that some form of agreement is put in place between the relevant operators. This would be a more appropriate approach to the delivery of the parking demand that they have found. But it has not been put forward because there is no profit available to the airport in such a situation. Having benefited from a monopoly for in excess of 20 years, it is highly unlikely that the airport are going to want to let that go. Within the application, they propose building additional parking directly in the greenbelt to provide approximately 2,700 spaces. I don't go into any detail in relation to how the numbers have been put together, other than to say that in my view, the numbers can only be skewed by the lack of proper assessment of off-airport car parking provision. If we go back to my Appendix 4, sir, you'll note that the council were looking into this as far back as 2011, but nothing further has happened. You'll also see that North Somerset Council made one attempt 2 years ago to write to South Gloucester to see whether a site that North Somerset had identified could be appropriate for off-airport car parking. Nothing further has been done to follow that up, despite the local parish councils regularly asking the council to deal with it. So it's not within your gift to change the local policy, and I totally appreciate that. However, it goes to the fact that the airport, in having put forward this scheme at this point in time, without having done the work to create an ASAS that is truly appropriate and considers the overall impact of their site and their operations, means that the scheme is inappropriate. Thank you, sir. I have nothing further.
Thank you, Miss Sutherland. Just wait there. I think Miss Noble's going to have some questions for you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Miss Sutherland. I'll try and look in your general direction. It's a bit odd with all these screens everywhere. The purpose of your involvement at this inquiry is to promote your client's site for off-airport car parking, isn't it?
No, the purpose of my attendance at this inquiry is to bring to the attention of the inspectors failings of the airport to assess off-airport car parking. I am representing one particular off-airport car parking operator, but I have in the past represented many of them, and I have been in discussions with many of them in relation to this.
Okay, in the context of this appeal, you've provided evidence as to a particular alternative site in relation to which I believe a planning application was submitted for off-airport car parking. That's right.
That's correct. Yes, absolutely.
And I understand that that planning application was refused by the council today. Could you just confirm
As I
that?
understand it, I've not received a copy of the notice yet because I've been here today, but yes, I understand that the council have refused it today.
I needn't take you, therefore, to the concerns of the council officers in relation to that application. Ms Sutherland, your expertise is in planning. You're not a transport consultant, are you?
No, but as with Mr Renshaw, I have been involved in aspects of transport planning as part of my ongoing work with any other form of planning. So no, I can't help you with the technical details, and hopefully I've been quite clear with that one. But I do consider I have quite significant knowledge of airport car parking operations.
Thank you. We've had today and yesterday quite extensive cross-examination of Mr Collis on transport issues, and the airport's case is set out in Mr Witchell's proof of evidence and rebuttal. So I am just going to keep this cross-examination to a few points and not go over the technical ground, if that's okay with you.
I appreciate you won't want to look into some of the points that I've made, no.
In relation to the scope of the dispute between us, you don't have any in principle objection to the expansion of the airport to 12 million passengers a year, do you?
No, absolutely not.
And I don't think there's any dispute that there is a demand for an increase in parking provision in association with that expansion.
That's absolutely correct.
There's no dispute that that increased demand should be met, is there?
No, of course, the demand needs to be met. I just think that the airport are proposing to deliver it in a way that's not appropriate.
And I think we agree with the approach of not developing further multi-storey car parks beyond MSCP2, which has permission, and this one proposed MSCP3. You're not suggesting further multi-storey car parks should be developed?
I'm not making any suggestions for how the airport deliver either multi-storey car parks or open car parks. My concern is that the airport refer to the fact that the delivery of multi-storey car parks will assist, and the PTI for that matter, will assist with reducing off-airport car parking, and I don't consider that that is correct.
But you acknowledge, or you would accept, would you not, that higher cost car parking won't address the issue of unauthorised car parking in the same way? I don't
think low cost addresses the problem of unauthorised car parking. I think that that's an absolute fallacy. For the last few years, BAL have been funding enforcement officers at North Somerset Council specifically to work on nothing but taking enforcement action against off-airport car parkers, and I see that that's proposed as one of their Section 106 measures. Again, unfortunately, it hasn't stopped, it hasn't prevented, it hasn't reduced the amount of off-airport car parking operators, and neither has the pricing schedule that your clients have put forward. Low-cost parking, unless your clients are proposing to deliver it at below the cost of my clients, will not in any way have an impact on our operations.
And we can agree, though, that it's a justifiable concern to seek to limit unauthorised off-site car parking.
Of course, unauthorised off-site car parking, but as I said before, there's no quantum in your client's evidence as to what constitutes authorised or unauthorised car parking. No work has been done by the airport to look at what is or isn't authorised. And in my view, a large percentage of it is authorised.
Right. Moving to your submission section of your proof of evidence, it starts at paragraph 5. Just see if we can agree a few points. It's not for these inspectors to consider the merits of your client's proposal for off-airport car parking, is it?
No. In this particular context, so obviously I have to be terribly careful not to move over into the Greenbelt argument. So in terms of the Greenbelt argument, obviously I am saying that mine is a sequentially preferable site, and accordingly it is absolutely relevant for the inspectors to consider and look into the merits of my scheme. In relation to highways and transport movements, my scheme doesn't have the same level of relevance, other than if the airport had properly considered the opportunities for park and ride facilities, they would not now be proposing expansions onto the Greenbelt to deliver their parking.
We'll come to the sequential test in the Greenbelt week, and I know you're coming back to give evidence then. Just sticking with your submissions section, the local plan policies that we have to apply in determining this appeal are up to date and should be given full weight, aren't they?
I don't consider that policy DM30 is up to date, no, but as the inspectors pointed out, that wasn't something that they wanted to look at.
And that doesn't feature anywhere in your statement of case or in your proof of evidence, does it? There's no explanation, there's no assertion by you that it is not up to date.
I haven't specifically said that, but I've referred to the fact that it's inappropriate in its content. And I just referred the inspectors back to my Appendix 4, which shows how DM30 was progressed through policy, and the fact that if this is relevant for the inspectors, that was progressed as a result of concerns about off-airport car parking in the Greenbelt, and has no relevance to off-airport car parking outside of the Greenbelt.
You make a number of points in your proof of evidence. Paragraph 6, you criticise the local plan policy for supporting a monopoly for the airport. Paragraph 8, you criticise local plan policy and paragraph 9, but it's not for these inspectors to consider the merits of that policy. It just has to be applied, doesn't it?
Well, the merits of that policy and whether or not that policy can be considered up to date is relevant in my view, although I take what the inspectors say. I consider it's relevant to consider the merits because that policy determines where else parking can take place other than on the airport site, which is what is being proposed.
The inspectors can't decide not to apply a development plan policy because they don't agree with it, can they?
No, they can decide not to apply a development management policy if they consider that there are material considerations that outweigh it, in much the same way as your client is asking them to consider that there are very special circumstances to outweigh Greenbelt policy.
Yes, that's an operation of Greenbelt policy. Final point then, you made a lot about the lack of an ASAS in your examination in chief. If we go to Mr. Witchell's rebuttal, this is table 2.4, it's on PDF page 32.
Bear with me. I've got Mr. Witchell. Sorry, was it his proof or the rebuttal? Sorry.
It's his rebuttal.
His rebuttal, and sorry, what was the reference?
It's PDF page 32, or it's paper copy page 27.
32. Yes, I have that.
Here, Mr. Witchell has provided extensive information on the measures that have been implemented to date.
Yes.
You don't dispute that these are measures that have been implemented to date by the airport?
I have no reason to dispute what's being said there.
And perhaps we can just agree that...
However...
Yes.
However, I would say, sorry, where it says public transport serving local communities, you can see that what the airport has done is effectively make financial payments towards a public transport service. And if you go to the fourth one along, it says A5 local bus service amended slightly to reflect the level of demand, better integration with onward journeys. And it says following 2 parking summits, an 8-point action plan was developed with stakeholders. In relation to that, there have been parking summits held, hosted by your clients, and inviting members of local parish councils and the council to take part in discussions about how parking will be managed. That 8-point action plan that's referred to in that document simply refers to some ways in which parking could be addressed. It doesn't refer to any consideration of park and ride. It doesn't refer to any consideration of forward thought. And of course, the ASAS is now considerably out of date. I think everybody recognises that.
Well, we're looking here at the measures that have been implemented by the airport from 2016.
I'm sure they've done what they're saying there. I only have cause to question one of those points, as I say, and that is in relation to the parking summit and whether or not that has delivered what it set out to do, because it's my understanding that none of the points from that 8-point action plan were delivered. And in fact, there's still feedback from the last parking summit with people not being able to access the purported action plan from the local parish councils.
Okay. Mr. Witchell's proof of evidence provides at his table 6.2, it's at page 55.
Sorry, so this is with his proof rather than the rebuttal?
Yes, sorry, switching over to his proof now.
No, that's okay, so we're on his proof, and which page, sorry?
It's page 55. I'm using the paper copy, but I think it's PDF page 61.
I've got 6.3 at the top. Ability to increase PT mode share.
Have you got table 6.2 CAA mode share? And this clearly shows, doesn't it, a track record of improvement in terms of public transport use?
Sorry, I'm trying to find it. I've got 6.1. 6.2. Sorry, could you put the question again? I'm sorry, I was looking for it. I wasn't listening.
No problem. This table shows a consistent track record of improvement in terms of public transport use across this period of time based on the CAA mode share data, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I don't think we need to turn it up, but there is an extensive package of public transport measures that are proposed in relation to this proposal as well.
What are those extensive measures? Perhaps you could point me to them and then we can discuss them properly.
Well, if we go to section 6.5 of Mr. Witchell's proof, it's called Public Transport Improvement Effects on Mode Share.
Yes.
We can turn through that. We've got the effects of bus improvements, table 6.4. New services, enhanced services, continuation of services.
This says potential service improvements.
Yes, these are the analysis of improvements that will form part of the ASAS that the airport are committing to produce within 6 months of the grant of permission in the Section 106 agreement.
But the ASAS has not been produced. You're relying on a document that doesn't currently exist and you're guessing at what its content might be.
There is, in the Section 106 agreement, an obligation on the airport to produce an ASAS within 6 months of the grant of permission, isn't there?
As I understand it, yes.
Yes, so that document will be produced.
Well, I can't comment on whether or not the airport will actually do what it says in its 106. It hasn't in the past always complied. But nevertheless, delivering an ASAS 6 months after granting planning permission for a document that requires an ASAS and relies upon it seems to me to be the wrong way round. Wouldn't you agree?
Right, Ms Sutherland, well, we've looked through what the airport's done so far. We've looked through the track record of improvements. It rather explains why the council have not been overly concerned about the lack of an up-to-date ASAS. There is a commitment in the Section 106 agreement to produce an ASAS, and no doubt the council would enforce that obligation under the Section 106 agreement if that wasn't done.
I would hope so.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me then.
Okay, thank you, Ms Sutherland.
Sir, I appreciate that I don't have a re-examination, but may I simply put a few more points based on the examination that I've just received?
Yes, you can, but we may go back to Ms Noble as well, okay? So we're happy for you to do that.
It was only the one point, sir, and that was that when Ms Noble was cross-examining me then, she asked me about the material benefits of the airport's scheme, and I asked her to point me to them, and she was unable to do so. She took me elsewhere within the document to demonstrate what Mr Witchell's thoughts were in relation to potential improvements that could happen. But I just wanted to bring out that for whatever reason, Ms Noble didn't want me to look at the improvements that are being proposed. And I suggest that may be because I disagree wholeheartedly that they are a significant package of improvements. And I consider that they don't go anywhere near far enough to address the off-site impacts of the airport parking proposals. That's all, sir. It's just the one point.
Ms Noble, would you just want to pick that up with your witness when you call him?
Thank you, sir. That's what I would propose as well.
Okay. All right, thank you, Ms Sutherland.
Thank you.
Right, Ms Beth.
Just whilst we remember it, we heard then that the decision has been made on the application that Ms Sutherland's involved in. Can we have a copy of that when it's available? Probably isn't available at this stage.
It's very much hot off the presser, but it's in hand, and it hopefully, maybe even later today, I think we should be able to get it to you.
Right, Miss Beth, you ready to go? Do you want to come down and set up? Mr. Henderson, I'm just sort of looking at the dynamics of this. Maybe
Shall I move, sir?
If
you want to tell me to shift, I won't
maybe
feel...
slide a chair down to the end, and that would help Mr.
Yeah,
Davis.
it's not a problem. I'll move behind, don't worry.
Would that help, Mr. Davis? Okay, you ready, Miss Beth? Are you ready, Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Right. Good afternoon. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Beth. You state in your qualifications and previous experience, you state your qualifications and previous experience in your proof. Could you say a bit more about your transport planning experience?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I am a chartered town planner with over 30 years' experience in local government and community groups. My transport experience, so local government experience was working at Brighton and Hove, where I dealt with projects, one of which was highway improvements on a very prominent road in Brighton, and the other was a complicated planning application where we were working on implementing quite significant modal shifts in the way people travel to a football ground. So that was fairly extensive transport planning experience. And then I've worked for the engineering charity Sustrans on 2 occasions. So promoting cycling, you have to understand modal shift and how you're going to do it. I have to say, I'm not commenting on highway design. I'm certainly not qualified for that. But any planner does have to have a working knowledge of transport planning, and mine has actually been reasonably extensive in terms of what a planner will do.
Thank you. Today you're presenting evidence from section 4 of your proof and also section 5, where it relates to parking and service access issues. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I mean, like a lot of people here, the parking directly implements on the green belt issues, but yeah, I'm here for the parking.
If we return to paragraph 4.1 of your proof, you state that travel to Bristol Airport is overwhelmingly by private car, and that the public transport modal share is one of the lowest at UK airports. Mr. Witchell, in his proof, paragraph 6.4.4, states that among regional airports, Bristol has the most effective public transport share. In the light of this, do you want to revise your statement?
No, I don't. Mr. Witchell gets to that conclusion by adding together private cars and taxi travel at every airport. Now, the use of private cars to access Bristol Airport is among the highest of UK airports, but they have a very low taxi modal share. And for me, for anyone really, it is not acceptable to include journeys made by taxi within the private transport category. Now, I've looked at, and I can offer this to the inquiry if you like, but the Department for Transport in their annual statistics, when they look at modal split, they clearly include taxis in public transport. Now, and the CAA, in their detailed breakdown, also give a difference between private cars and taxis. Now, I understand that if you're talking about the type of vehicle, it's quite legitimate to include taxis, cars, and vans. But if you're talking about the type of journey, taxis are part of the wider public transport offer.
So does this low taxi modal share concern you?
Well, it does a bit, yeah. I mean, taxis are part of a wider sustainable travel offer. They're an important facility for people who can't drive for reason of disability, visual impairment, for example. And if you don't own a car or if you don't have access to one for a while, then they supplement public transport late at night to difficult destinations, etc. And I think it's worth pointing out two things. First, the Joint Local Transport Plan, which is CD 7.5, page 59, page 103 makes it clear that taxis and private hire vehicles have a role to play in promoting accessibility. And the Joint Local Transport Plan also talks at page 59 about the MAS scheme, which is, let me get this right. Oh, I can't remember what MAS stands for again. It's something about, accessibility. Accessibility for all.
Mobility as a service?
Oh, thank you. That's mobility as a service. So the Joint Local Plan talks about this, and if you look at Mr. Witchell's proof, among the lists of improvements, his proof of evidence list in 4.5.4, the airport are proposing to give a £25,000 contribution to a MAS scheme, which will include taxis. So I find there's a slight contradiction there. And then I have to say, when I looked at the ASAS hierarchy proposal, I mean, I was actually quite horrified that taxis, even taxis that have a journey into the airport and out, are below private cars in that hierarchy. Now, that is a very unusual sustainable transport policy and hierarchy. I mean, if people want to check that, the proof of evidence figure 4.6 gives that ASA. But, that's...
Thank you. Going back to the comparison with the other regional airports, can you explain why Birmingham and Manchester have a taxi modal share of about 28%, whereas Bristol taxi modal share is only 10%?
Okay, I'm not going to attempt to explain it entirely. I mean, I find it really interesting that despite both having rail links, they don't seem to have more public transport, but they do have an awful lot more taxi use, which is public transport still. But what I would say is, I'd offer firstly that BAL are quite clear that they discourage taxi use. Any taxi apart from Arrow going to the airport have to pay the drop-off fee of £4. And they also they talk about their exclusive arrangement with Arrow. Now, a paper I submitted yesterday had a pricing list. When I phoned Arrow for a quote to the airport, I was quoted £38. Other operators, it's somewhere around £25, and that's with the £4 charge. When you look at what happens at Birmingham and Manchester, you find that there are exclusive arrangements still, but that black cabs can still use them, and of course black cabs have a regulated fare structure. So the taxi fare at Birmingham and Manchester is more like £30 for an equal sort of journey.
Right. Thank you. If we go back to your proof of evidence, section 4, so 4.1, and you state that bus services to Bristol Airport are relatively expensive, and that unless they are reduced, significant modal shift to public transport is not going to happen. Are you reassured by the improvements to public transport detailed in Mr. Witchell's proof?
Well, no, not really. The improvements are concentrating on frequency improvements and various other improvements, but at no point is cost really properly dealt with, and there's been no assessment of what may happen with cost. Now, again, in that document I submitted yesterday, I looked at various costs. So, and just to go back onto the frequency, I mean, you know, Bristol is a major source of customers for the airport. That bus service is good. It's frequent, it's reliable, and improving that further in terms of frequency and reliability it's going to be diminishing returns. It's not going to get very much. Now, but if you look at the cost of it, so I think it's the parking demand study that gave us the average car occupancy, which goes up, I believe, to 2.3 in the peak season. It's lower at other times, but the peak season is crucial for determining how much parking one needs. So the bus fare is £13 return from Bristol Temple Meads to the airport. So that's nearly £30 for that fare for the average car occupancy. You'll have extra costs on that because you've got to get to Temple Meads generally or to the bus station. You'll have extra time and inconvenience because you're carrying your luggage and moving it around. And, you know, looking at BAL's figures for car parking, which roughly equate to £50 at the Silver Zone, £60 in multi-storey, you're not really competitive. You know, there's a lot more convenience to driving and parking at the airport. Never mind the off-site, you know, which is always cheaper. So that's why I'm saying that fare is not competitive. And, you know, if you look at somewhere like Bath, you get the same thing going on. The rail and bus from Bath will cost somebody, I think it's about £31 something, and more, you know, just over half that is the bus fare. Now, so two people travelling from Bath, well, they might as well, they're equivalent to parking, and not just at the Silver Zone. So for me, if you want to really make significant extra changes to public transport, you need to reduce the cost. Now, I appreciate that may need subsidy. I know there is a certain amount of subsidy paid by the airport at the moment, but I think if you're looking at a genuine promotion of public transport, that should have been negotiated with the airport.
So is your general conclusion that travelling to Bristol Airport by bus is not always the cheapest option?
It's certainly not. I mean, if you're in Bristol, using the bus is not necessarily that cheap, particularly if there's more than one, and it quite quickly becomes not properly competitive given the extra inconvenience. I mean, everybody knows that it is more convenient to get in your car, particularly if you own one. You've just got the marginal costs of using your car. And if there are more than two of you, then, or even just two of you, it starts starts to be nearly as expensive.
Okay.
And actually, I would just say that the other thing I submitted yesterday did show the cost of travel by coach from other cities and towns. Now, these services are not directly comparable. They're not nearly as frequent as the Bristol one, but they're a lot cheaper. I mean, it costs actually less, or no, possibly just slightly more, return fare from Plymouth. That's from Bristol, Temple Meads to the airport.
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
If we go on to the provision of low-cost parking in the expanded Silver Zone site, and it's justified in the parking demand study, it's justified by the fact that demand is highest for low-cost parking, as we've discussed earlier in the afternoon. And is this a sustainable approach to parking provision?
Well, no, it can't be really. I mean, it's a kind of predict and provide. If you're promoting public transport, you need to be controlling your parking to an extent and pricing it so that it's truly competitive with public transport. So you can't just say, well, people want cheap parking, so we'll provide it. I mean, it's not really surprising. Yeah, people are going to prefer cheap parking. But in the context of leisure travel, where they've paid quite a bit for their flight, certainly a lot more for their holiday, then the costs of parking, convenience is going to be quite an important part of that. Plus which, if fares on public transport aren't going to be reduced as part of this scheme, then it's even more important, actually, that parking is not cheap.
Before we leave the parking, are there any other comments you want to add on car parking at Bristol Airport?
Yeah, that's quite loud. I mean, so parking on the south side of the airport at the Silver Zone is a little bit cheaper, according to BAL's pricing estimates. There's a slight inconvenience of needing to get the bus ride over. But there isn't really a very significant difference between the multi-storey car park, the long-term, and Silver Zone. I actually would take some issue with Andrew Renshaw in terms of calling the multi-storey premium. I think there are certain parts of the car park with particularly good access and particular services that could be called premium, but I don't see the multi-storey, certainly in terms of parking, isn't that. What is very significant are the cost differences, and this has been mentioned before, between constructing multi-storey car parking spaces and building surface parking, particularly on a green field. And that, of course, this is an impact on BAL and their profits, and a private company can be expected to prefer the more profitable option. They probably should, from the point of view of their shareholders. But I would say that it is for the planning authority to impose the policy requirements that development in the green belt and promotion of sustainable transport need. And I'm afraid I don't think I did that. And I don't think the local planning authority did that when they considered this application. And I would just say people probably have noticed that in my proof, I did make a rough attempt with the help of an architect friend who gave me some rough costings. Now, I know that viability study is incredibly crude, but all I would say is it is the best that I can see anywhere in this application. I mean, BAL should have been required by the local planning authority to provide some sort of viability study to justify particularly why they wanted to provide parking in the green belt. And it's not there.
So looking at the phasing proposal, the officer's report set out phasing proposals for provision of new surface car parking. What comments would you make on these?
Well, the first phase is building in the green belt.
Yep.
I mean, construction in the green belt inset should be the first priority. And, I might as well say it here, but in terms of if you look at the previous expansion permission, that was going to have a public transport interchange, which hasn't been provided. It was going to have more multi-storey car parking which hasn't been provided. Now, I accept that the airport quite legitimately have gotten revisions to their previous planning permission. It's not that they're doing anything they shouldn't, but I would suggest that the local planning authority, if they couldn't hold them to that, in this application should have said, now wait a minute, we have an outstanding public transport interchange, we have outstanding parking at the multi-stories that needs to be constructed. That has to be the first phase, and it should have, a PTI should have been part of this application. It really should have been.
Following on from that, can we go to paragraph 5.9 of your proof, where you discuss a type of parking provision that offers a cheaper decked solution? Can you say a little more about this?
Yes, I mean, it is mentioned in one of the core documents, the design manual for multi-storey car parks, which is CD 7.23. It's described here as a temporary provision, but it's also described as being capable of being a permanent solution as well, and people will be aware that this is where you build another level of car parking over surface parking. It's much cheaper because you don't need the same sort of foundations that you do in a multi-storey. And of course, there is a very obvious place for this to be constructed, and it's in the long stay car parking areas where there are, in the Greenbelt inset, where you have an existing hard surface car parking area, extensive areas, that could be decked with another level provided first.
And is it true that some of these systems don't need foundations at all, and they can be built in phasing over an existing car park that is in constant use?
I'd have to take advice on how they would be constructed, but yes, basically they're quick, they're temporary, and they could also be a solution to this issue of not quite knowing how much parking the airport's going to need.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, if you look at the parking strategy, core document 2.12, you'll find that decked parking was considered, but only at the silver zone. So option C there considers building decked another storey parking in the green belt, and not unreasonably decides that this would be unacceptable. But of course the point is that it would be acceptable in the green belt inset to the north side of the airport. Yeah.
Can we now look at paragraph 5.6 of your proof, with autonomous vehicle? So with the potential impact of autonomous vehicles on parking requirements at BAU. And you quote CD 2.11, 2.11 as discounting any impact because it's unlikely to happen before 2030. Do you think the potential impact should now be taken into account of autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with them. You know, I'm not an expert, but if you follow the progress of autonomous vehicles, I think there are significant technical hurdles, and I accept that the date of 2030 is reasonable for a first date when it might actually be possible for them to run on the road. It's quite possible that they would only be running on particular routes, for example, perhaps from Nailsea Station to the airport. But of course, the thing is that as a group, we made a case in the forecasting section of this inquiry that actually the reasonable best case scenario as we see it now is a date of 2030 for increase to 12 MPPA. Now, I know BAL won't agree with that, but I think they described meeting that number at 2027 as just about credible. So, and that means if everything has shifted on with the pandemic, and so it is actually very likely that that number will not be reached until after 2030. And so the impact of autonomous vehicles should be considered. And again, actually, if you look at the Joint Local Transport Plan, at page 39, they're asking that autonomous vehicles be prioritised as part of the airport generally, and also there could be at the airport. And I would just say that the same page also says that driving to the airport needs to be limited. So, you know, which would again suggest that that hierarchy in the ASAS is just, it's no longer fit for purpose in terms of what a proper sustainable transport policy should be.
So what would the implications be for autonomous vehicles on parking demand?
Of course, the key thing is that they don't need to be parked. They take people to the airport, they may well take them back. The vehicle does, and no doubt you have to pay for that, but you don't have to park an autonomous vehicle. So as they become more and more used, again, it puts a big question on the parking requirement and certainly challenges whether that should be in the green belt.
So you're critical of the deal that's been agreed for service access as part of this application, and of the reasoning in the officer's report that finds the proposal acceptable. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I think North Somerset Council officers got the planning balance very wrong here. Perhaps they allowed the potential economic benefits of airport expansion to override their own transport and greenbelt policy requirements. You know, I can't say, but I find quite a lot of their reasoning muddled in the officer's report and just not acceptable, and not looking back at sort of earlier attempts to get things more sustainable at the airport. I mean, car parking revenues are a significant part of BAL's income, and it's not actually fair to expect the company to limit them, but it is fair to expect a local planning authority to tell them what the policy requirements are and what they need to operate within. And I don't think that's been done, I'm afraid, acceptably in the officer's report in any recommendation to approve the application as it stands here.
Ms. Beck, thank you very much.
Ms. Noble.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Ms. Beth.
Afternoon.
I'm just going to ask you some questions on a few sections of your evidence, because I know you're coming back later in the inquiry in future sessions. You explained in your examination in chief about your experience with transport matters. I understand that, but you're not a transport consultant, are you?
I'm not.
As I said with Miss Sutherland, we've had quite extensive cross-examination of Mr. Collis, so I'm not going to repeat points that have been made. I'm going to focus in this cross-examination on your section 4, as you did in your examination in chief, but just to make clear, it's not that we agree with all other parts of your written evidence where it differs from ours. Paragraph 4.1, you make the point about Bristol Airport's public transport mode share being one of the lowest compared to other airports. And you reference there the officer's report. Now, we needn't turn that up, but the position in the officer's report and the figures were based on 2017 CAA data.
Yes, and there does seem to be some problems with the data generally. They've fluctuated between the different reports. I understand that the 2019 CAA data came out and changed things. So I think all of the figures need to be handled with a certain amount of caution, because the bus ticketing evidence is different to the CAA one, which is after all a survey. So yeah.
As you said, we do now have the 2019 CAA data. So if we could just go back to the table 6.3 that's in Mr. Witchell's proof of evidence. It's on page 56, which is PDF page 62 for anybody using the electronic copy. I think you referred to this in your examination in chief.
Yes, sorry, I've not actually found it yet. Did
No
it?
problem.
It's in the proof of evidence of Mr. Witchell, is it?
It is, yes.
And
Page 56.
Page 56. Yes, and actually that's an abbreviated version, isn't it? We had a core document given to us that had all the airports on it. Came through on the bank holiday, I think, wasn't it?
Right, yes, I do believe another party was submitting this data. Just looking at this table here, you made some points about Mr. Witchell's counting the proportion of people using taxi, minicab or Uber. Just leaving that aside, if we just look at the rows that are called bus/coach and rail, if we look along there, and you can get the kind of, you can add those up to compare between these airports, we'll see that Bristol has 21.8% share, which is better than Cardiff, going along the line, isn't it?
Well, now, what are we doing about the taxis? I mean,
Just-
it's better than Cardiff. It would appear to be roughly similar to Birmingham, but Birmingham has a very high taxi use, which is also public transport.
We will come to taxis, don't worry,
Which is-
just in a moment. I'm just looking for now at bus, coach and rail on here.
Well, that limited description of public transport, yeah, the London ones are much better. Manchester and Birmingham, roughly comparable, Cardiff worse.
Yeah, so Bristol, looking at Cardiff, Birmingham, Manchester, is the best of those four,
Well,
if you add those up. The other two...
but do you know something? I think given the difficulties with the figures, it is very difficult. I think you're best to stick to look at sort of percentiles. So the London airports, not very surprisingly, are much better on public transport. Cardiff is worse. If you had the full set of data, I think you'd find that Belfast was worse as well. But within that statement of those, call them more sort of mass public transport, I would say that Bristol is comparable with Manchester and Birmingham. The problem is, of course, is that you have much higher taxi use at Birmingham and Manchester, which is also public transport.
Miss Beth, when Miss Noble asks you a question, quite happy for you to talk. Try and answer the question that she's asking you with a yes or no.
I did ramble a bit there.
And then you can qualify that. But try not to
Yeah.
answer a different question. If she's asking you about coaches and bus, let's deal with that, and she'll come to taxis in a bit.
Okay, so
I think the question she asked was Bristol better than Birmingham, Manchester, Cardiff on those figures?
Well, my answer would be no. It's better than Cardiff, but I don't see the evidence that it's better than Birmingham and Manchester. Not significantly.
Okay, well, the figures are there. If you add it up, Birmingham's 20.7%, Manchester's 20.7%, but that's just written there as a matter of fact. I understand that your interpretation of that data is different, so we won't discuss that any further. If we just stay in Mr. Witchell's proof of evidence, if we go back to page 21, I'm afraid I don't know what the PDF reference is
I've
for
got
this.
the real thing. I just haven't worked out how to quickly scroll through my iPad. Yeah, 21.
We've got here Mr. Witchell's figure 4.6, which is the ASAS modal hierarchy. Now, you referred to this in your examination in chief, and as I understand it, XRLDA's position is that we should be promoting taxi use. Is that right?
Not entirely. What I'm saying it's not acceptable to do is to promote travel by private car over taxis.
Okay, well, if we just look at that for a moment, we've got 3 tiers on this triangle. The top tier is public transport and walking and cycling. We can probably understand why they're top of the triangle. The second rung, we have private car parked and taxi with passengers in both legs.
But you're making a clear distinction there between the private car parked and taxi, and I don't actually think they should be in the same rung.
So just so I'm clear, XRL's position is that taxis should be promoted over private car parks. You just don't agree with us putting them in the same rung there.
Well, look, you've got a clear top to bottom strategy there. So if you wanted to put them joint equal, they would have been alongside each other. They're not. Your private car's parked, and for some reason it has to be an authorised car park for duration of trip and use, well, of course it's going to be used for the return leg, is above taxis, and that's taxis with passengers in both access and return leg. And you then go on to taxi with one leg, and then private car drop-off, and then private car parked in an unauthorised car park. I mean, you've got a clear hierarchy there that you're indicating.
I'll get Mr. Witchells to go through and explain this, how this works and the rungs, but we can agree, can't we, that taxis with passengers in a single leg is less sustainable than someone driving their car one way and then driving back at the end of their trip. You have an additional 2 trips on the roads.
You do, but sustainability and the carbon burden of something is not simply about the journeys. And I can explain that further if you like. So if you look at a cradle-to-grave analysis of a motor vehicle, its construction is heavily carbon, it produces a lot of carbon to construct it. Now, what you could argue, and I don't have the figures here, all I'm saying is it is simplistic to just go on the journeys. So a vehicle like a taxi is being used quite intensively. It will be renewed quicker. It will become more efficient. It's quite an efficient use of the original carbon investment in constructing the vehicle. So, in fact, the carbon burden of taxis as opposed to private cars is not that simple. And in terms of sustainability, which includes social benefits as well as environmental and indeed economic, the social benefits of taxis is that they do widen accessibility to access, and they also tend to, the availability of taxi services tends to reduce dependence on car ownership, or to reduce car ownership, which also has an implication for the carbon burden of constructing them.
Thank you. That's probably my fault for using the word sustainability. You would agree, wouldn't you, with the objective of reducing trips on the road to and from the airport?
By private car, yes.
I think we'll leave that point about taxis. One point of clarification. In your section 4, paragraph 4.1, you talk about the aim of increasing the public transport mode share by 2.5%. Just as a point of clarification, the proposal is not seeking to increase the public transport mode share to an absolute figure of 17.5%, that is, it's a 2.5% increase, 0.5% a year. That's correct, isn't it?
I mean, I'll take your word for that. I have to say, you know, if your share is already where the CAA say it is, which is over 20%, then presumably you're going to be increasing it to 22.5%. Yes,
so whatever the baseline is, the increase will be on top of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the figures are confused, and let's face it, they're not helped by the pandemic, which is, you know, any sort of monitoring at the moment is just not going to be possible.
Paragraph 4.2, you refer to the importance of the public transport interchange. Now, the airport is committing to the delivery of the public transport interchange in the draft section 106 for this development. That's right, isn't it?
Well, okay, let me put it like this. If I had been the planning officer negotiating on this application, I would have wanted it to be included as one of the proposals in the application, because it was meant to have been provided previously and hadn't been.
Ms Beth, the question was, is it in the section 106? Yes or no, then you can...
It's a commitment, yes, but I'm not convinced it's going to be produced.
Okay, well, we'll leave that. The council clearly can enforce obligations in the section 106 agreement. It's already got planning permission, so. Paragraph 4.3, you talk about, and you also made this point in your evidence in chief, about the construction of further parking in the Greenbelt being given first priority. We might not need to turn it up. The parking strategy outlines a sequential assessment that was carried out, doesn't it?
I'll take your word for it, yeah.
Well, let's just look at it
Okay.
rather than me describing it. It's parking strategy CD 2.12.
And which paragraph is it there?
If you go to, if you're using electronic, it's PDF page 27.
No, I'm using electronic, but I'm using the actual pages.
Okay, well that's page 27 as well.
For me, this is review of potential car parking locations.
Yeah, so if we
Section 5.
If we go to section 5.2, overarching approach, paragraph 5.2.1,
Yeah.
the sequential approach is as follows. So we look, number 1, sites within the Greenbelt inset. 2, strategic park and ride locations remote from the airport, including land outside the Greenbelt, sites within the airport site but outside the Greenbelt inset, and then sites in Greenbelt locations contiguous to the airport site. So that's the approach that has been applied. That's not giving first priority to parking in the Greenbelt, is it, that approach?
No, but it hasn't considered, for example, the decked parking solution in the Greenbelt inset, so that may well be the strategy, but it's questionable in its implication, in its implementation.
I'm tempted to not get in too far into considering the sequential assessment, just because we will be coming to it not next week but the following week. In terms of the demand for low-cost car parking, you also mentioned in paragraph 4.3, XR elders haven't produced any substantive analysis to demonstrate that the parking need is different to that assessed by the airport, have they?
What we're saying is, no, we haven't, but we haven't produced it, but that is because we don't think you predict and provide with parking. You have to see it in a wider context of a sustainable transport policy where controlling parking and pricing it so that it encourages use of public transport is part of that policy.
Predict and provide sounds awfully like monitor and manage, which is the approach that's proposed, isn't it?
Predict and provide implies that there's nothing wrong with providing car parking, you just find out how much is needed and build it.
Absolutely. And Mr. Whitchells in section 8.3 of his evidence discusses the monitor and manage approach. We'll leave that to Mr. Whitchells to explain further in evidence in chief. But you do understand that that is proposed so that car parking infrastructure will not be delivered unless it is required.
Well, I don't understand that because I find, yeah, so I think you better agree that it isn't predict and provide because that would just not be acceptable. The problem with managing the car parking is if you build in the Greenbelt in phase 1, you can't pull back from that. You've put the infrastructure and the hard surface down on the Greenbelt. So if you're talking about managing demand, you have to be able to manage it within the context of not only not having built stuff that is particularly unacceptable, but also, and this is where the decked parking as a temporary solution may come in, is that it is much more acceptable to put a temporary solution in the Greenbelt inset, and so fine if there's a managing demand strategy, but it needs to consider what the hard infrastructure is being provided and when. And what I'm saying is that the current phasing is not acceptable.
Well, at the moment, it's proposed that in phase 1, there'd be MSCP 2, which already has consent, phase 1, and then phase 2 would be the parking that forms part of this proposal, and that would be subject to the monitor and manage approach, as explained in section 8.3 of Mr. Whitchells' proof.
Well, you haven't been very specific about where the car parks are located, but my understanding is that phase 1 is moving from a seasonal use of car parking in the Greenbelt to an annual one, and that phase 2 is building the Greenbelt extension. All of this to happen before the multi-storey car park, I forget which number, 2 is provided.
It's actually in Mr. Whitchells' proof at paragraph 8.1.4 is the proposed phasing. That's page 75.
Page 75.
So, yeah.
Has to be a better
Sorry,
way
what was the paragraph number?
It's paragraph 8.1.4.
Sorry, what page are we on?
Sorry, page 75.
Getting warm.
So that sees early delivery of public transport improvements, a review of multimodal pricing, construction of MSCP 2 already consented, delivery of the high-quality public transport interchange, which you were concerned was a missed opportunity, construction of the A38 improvement scheme. You're quite right, removal of the seasonal restrictions on the existing Silver Zone car park. Then if we turn over, there's phase 2, development of the proposed further Silver Zone car park extension and construction of MSCP 3.
Okay, that is a change to the proposed phasing in the planning officer's report. So you're proposing to change the application, actually.
Is there anything that you would change there, Ms. Beth?
Yes, I would. I would remove the green belt proposals, both of them, and look instead to constructing the decked solution in the Greenbelt inset.
Right, well, perhaps in the Greenbelt week we'll come back in more detail to exactly which options have been considered as part of the sequential test. I've just got a couple more points for you. Unauthorised car parking, which you refer to in your paragraph 4.7. You agree, don't you, with the objective of discouraging unauthorised car parking in the Greenbelt?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, I thought Amanda Sutherland's points on this were very well made, that some of it, so let's be clear what we're talking about. Unauthorised is people without planning permission setting up in fields with a minibus service. And there'll be green belt fields as well. Yeah, that should be discouraged.
So in principle, you would agree with a proposal seeking to reduce that problem,
In terms of planning enforcement action, yes.
but not in terms of a proposal that you're seeking planning permission for, insofar as it can seek to reduce that problem of unauthorised parking as a matter of principle.
I agree with Amanda Sutherland and North Somerset Council that providing cheap parking on the airport is not going to deal with that problem.
I don't think that was the question you were asked.
No, but I found the question quite opaque, to be honest. I've agreed that enforcement action against unauthorised car parking in the green belt is a good idea.
Let me rephrase it, Ms. Beth. It might be my fault. Would you agree that as a matter of principle, where possible, the proposed development should assist in reducing the problem of unauthorised car parking?
No, I wouldn't, because I don't think it can.
Final point, cost of parking. Mr. Witchells, in his proof, explains that the airport are committing to carry out a multimodal pricing review, which presumably you would support.
I would support it if I had a clear commitment to looking at reducing fares. It says nothing about that, actually. And there's no assessment work being undertaken to see what the impact of this could be.
Okay. There was an additional document submitted to the inquiry, I think yesterday, or in the last couple of days, the second side of which was a table that was copied from Mr. Witchell's evidence. Just one point on this. You identify car parking costs, table 9.2. Just as a point of clarification, when we're looking at these costs, we must bear in mind that they're the lowest range of prices currently offered by the airport, aren't they?
Well, they're in your client's evidence, so you know more about. I've copied it from them. I've copied it from Mr. Witchell's proof of evidence, and then used it to compare with the buses and the rest. I mean, you've given them as, I take them at good faith that you've given them as the cost of your parking.
I mean, we can look at the original if necessary, but there's an asterisk underneath that you've removed in your copy that says that it's the lowest range of prices currently offered, so that's why I just wanted to clarify that point. Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beth. Right, shall we have a break? Oh, so, Mr. Davis, do you want to come back and ask any re-examination on the points that Ms. Noble has put to Ms. Beth?
Yes, there's just one. Coming back to the decked parking, could you confirm again the benefits of providing decked parking in terms of flexibility to satisfy parking demand at the airport?
Yeah, I mean, it's cheaper, is certainly a benefit. It's quicker to install and easier, and most definitely less disruptive than building a multi-storey car park. And it's potentially temporary and flexible, so that if you're looking to do this demand management exercise that Val are looking to do, then using something like that is something that can be constructed and removed much easier than either a multi-storey car park or an extensive area of car parking surface laid down on a green field in the green belt.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Beth. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we'll take 25 minutes. We'll come back at 3:30, and then Miss Byrne, you want to set up during the break down here, and Mr Morehouse, do you want to move down here where Mr Davis is? Thank you. Right, the inquiry is adjourned. Okay, the inquiry is now resumed. Just before I hand over to Mr. Morehouse, Miss Noble, is your highway witness going to be available today? Is it or not? I mean, I know
I
it's a
would
bit...
have to check. I believe we were anticipating starting
No, I know.
his evidence tomorrow morning.
I wasn't anticipating making the progress that we've made this afternoon, so it's just occurred to us if he was ready to go, we could maybe have an hour of him today.
I don't believe so, sir, but I will make inquiries and just confirm.
That's fine. If we're more than content with an early finish, if we want to start tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Byrne, you've given evidence earlier on in the inquiry, so I won't go through any reintroductions. You're here to assist so far as you're able to with your evidence on the issues of transport, which obviously interrelate with a few other issues as well. So far as the Parish Council Airport Association's general stance on the application to increase both the number of passengers and also car parking spaces. Do you want to provide an overview of where you stand on those issues?
Yes, I'd like to do an overview for the parishes. So the increase in passengers will inevitably lead to more car parking spaces, more traffic on our roads, and the use of the green belt. It's an already dire situation, and yesterday our MP Liam Fox sent an email to the inquiry, which I'm going to actually just read 2 sentences from, and it starts with a statement. In all my communications about the potential expansion of Bristol Airport, my main concern has always been the congestion of ground transportation and the impact it has on the quality of life of my constituents. It ends with our local road network is already straining at the seams. I believe this is the primary reason why the proposed expansion of airport passenger numbers should not go ahead. I submitted the document last night to the inquiry.
And I think we've been told it's going to be listed as a submission to the inquiry rather than as a formal document.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that's great.
So that's Dr. Liam Fox, the local MP's contribution. So far as your appreciation of the existing situation, the local network of roads already straining at the seams, what's your evidence in relation to that?
Well, as the inspectors from their site visit will know now, it's basically 2A roads and rural lanes. And I'd just like to give a contrast. So Birmingham Airport, which has a motorway but also has an air rail link. Luton Airport has the DART, an air rail link. East Midlands Airport is very close to the M1 and the M42. And Manchester Airport is next to the M56. And we've heard about taxi use just a bit earlier, so I won't mention that. So the PCA simply do not believe that the road network will increase. It's at capacity now with the increase to 12 million passengers.
Can I just ask you, because we've heard evidence earlier on in the week about the proposed improvements to various roads in the area, what is your position in relation to, let's assume that they're all able to be implemented successfully. I know there's a dispute about a number of them, but if they were able to be implemented successfully, what's your view in relation to what will happen?
Well, there's 2 main proposals, which is the Bristol Airport proposals around the surrounding entrance to the airport in the Silver Zone, and there's the North Somerset Council, the A38 Major Road Network Scheme. Now, we have actually discussed this as a Parish Council Airport Association at meetings, and we have submitted to the North Somerset Council's consultation. We simply regard the Bristol Airport's proposals and the North Somerset's major network road scheme proposals as a tweaking of the system. We do not think it will resolve the problem of the network surrounding the airport. It will simply displace traffic. Traffic will move slightly faster just around the entrance, and then it will slow down at the next junction point.
So have you identified any areas that you think would be particularly affected?
Well, the Churchill traffic lights will be very badly affected because we've also got the Banwell bypass coming. So there will be traffic getting through Banwell quicker, and it will all meet at that junction, and there will be very long tailbacks. The same thing will happen. Traffic will flow out of the airport, flow quickly through the top of Downside, down Brockley Combe to the traffic lights on the A370. And the tailback will just be there, and it will be elsewhere. We're not resolving the problem, we're just simply displacing the problem. People have to have houses, they will have to go into Bristol, they have to go about their business, and people have to come to the airport. Any more growth, and we're going to become a static road surface network, not being able to move. Both schemes, we believe, will impact the rural location, and they're in the green belt, so they'll impact on the openness of the green belt. We believe that some form of an analysis and assessment should have been taken, such as a web tag analysis, so that we can actually see the benefits to us, because we don't actually believe any benefits are going to come from these schemes.
Now, so far as the general nature of traffic movement, so I just want to bring you onto a slightly different, but it's sort of related subject, which is about the proposal to increase or to lessen controls over and to potentially increase the number of night flights. What do you think that's going to do so far as traffic movements?
There's obviously going to be more car movements to the airport, but this will certainly impact the modal transport split, because the bus services and coach services just aren't frequent enough at night to get passengers to the airport for these flights. So they have to come by car.
If we turn then to the general issue of the proposed car parking alterations, can you help us with your views on that, please?
Well, we know from the planning consent of 2011 that there were 12,000 car parking spaces on the south side. We also know that we've had 2 permitted development rights applications, which was for further car parking on the south side in Greenbelt land for 200 car parking spaces and 260 car parking spaces. So we know that permitted development regulations must be removed on Greenbelt land. Conditions can be circumvented, and it means that the communities and the local parish councillors and our elected members, district councillors, simply cannot challenge permitted development regulations. All these rights simply must be removed if the airport appeal is granted consent.
So there's an element you're talking about public, the rights of the public to become involved in those processes should permitted development applications be made.
Yes, we should, because if there's supposed to be 12,000 car parking spaces on the site, why should there be any more under a planning consent? There's an inherent unfairness on car parking issues, because we know we've got off-site car parking. These are some are legal, some are not legal. Amanda Sutherland put it very succinctly earlier this afternoon. And the inherent unfairness comes that the airport is constantly allowed more green car parking and has all the revenue from car parking, because it is about a third of its revenue. It makes a year, and it's highly relevant to its business model and how it works. And it seems very unfair that other people can't share in this revenue, who are locals.
Now, so far as the general position about the proposed additional car parking on the Greenbelt land, what are your views in relation to that?
Well, we've got the Silver Zone Extension Phase 1 with seasonal restrictions, which has been allowed to operate with a seasonal restriction of 1 year. The airport will have to put into a new application depending on what happens here in this appeal. We have Silver Zone Extension Phase 2 for a further 2,700 car parking spaces. We don't want any more land, Greenbelt land, released for car parking. We think enough's enough. We think that it will bring more lighting, it will bring more noise, it's in a tranquil area. We also believe special circumstances have not been demonstrated, and there's not been alternatives being presented to us, or so that we can have a choice of what happens. We have to note that the Silver Zone Extension 1 was, and Extension 2 is, semi-improved pasture grazed by cattle. This is of prime importance to the greater and lesser horseshoe bat, which are protected species. Now, the cattle are very important because they create the cowpats, which have the dung beetle, which the bats
We are
forage on.
diverging somewhat significantly away
Right.
from highway issues, so let's try and
Keep,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
just rein it
Yeah.
back a little bit to highways.
So you've got concerns because of the impact on the SAC.
Yeah. Yeah.
So may I just make an observation just on that point, because at some point
We're not.
PCAA raise effectively a point of law on that. We don't believe that this matter has been dealt with properly, but I can perhaps address the inquiry later in relation to that. But you have those concerns in addition to the transport issues of increased car traffic using those sites.
Yeah, I mean, we find it very difficult. The appeal is, and the inquiry is, dividing the issues up and not looking at them in the round. I understand why you have to take one particular issue and examine it, and it all becomes insignificant. But there is a roundness, and they are all connected, and it is very important, that interconnection between traffic, increased passengers, more traffic, more car parking on the green belt, which affects a protected species under the EU habitats regulations. And I think that has to be part of the car parking issue.
Thank you. Turning then, if we can, to the what's described as the low-cost parking issue. Do you want to make any observations in relation to that?
Yes, I would like to. So firstly, BAL's low-cost parking strategy obviously is to attract passengers to fly, but it's also to deter passengers from using off-site car parking. But it's simply not successful because the off-site car parking, as we've heard today, undercuts now, and it will continue to do so in the future. So low-cost parking on that sense doesn't work. Secondly, it relates to low-cost development in comparison to developing expensive multi-stories. BAL would much prefer to use open green fields than build an expensive multi-storey car park, especially one with a public transport interchange on the top. So in respect to the first interpretation, passengers who seek to avoid car parking fees, we recognise that there will always be a nuisance to residents by parking on the streets and the rural lanes. Some passengers will, no matter what happens, will always seek to avoid paying. But we also believe that low-cost parking acts as a subsidy for passengers, especially who fly frequently. The subsidy encourages people to fly, the most polluting activity one can do, and we're in a time of a climate and biodiversity crisis. We also know from figure 9 in the addendum car parking inquiry that passengers' wealth is expected to increase in the region, which increases the demand for car parking, as these people, passengers, prefer to drive to the airport. This actually confirms our belief that low-cost parking is in direct conflict with encouraging passengers to use public transport. Therefore, public transport, as Ms. Beth said, needs to be subsidised and much cheaper to encourage people to take it. There should be no further car parking on greenbelt land to encourage a higher transport modal split. BAL has complete control over the cost of parking, so it can put the prices up. If it really wants to be sustainable, it has to put its prices up to encourage passengers to take public transport.
Of course, as a planning consideration, the inspectors won't have a day-to-day control over the prices of parking. So as a general principle, your view is what?
Well, our view is then you have to take another step and dismiss car parking in the greenbelt so that car parking is not an option.
You, I think, addressed then the issues of the low-cost parking.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything else about modal split of travel?
Yeah, I mean, we believe that the 2.5% of the modal split is very lacking in ambition, and we believe it should be 8%, so that if we're looking at the 21.8 CAA figure, it should be nearer 30%. We're looking for radical change. That we're talking about in the next 10 years, and we have to have radical change. We actually find the modal split figures very hard with the new CAA figures to understand. And we have looked at table C in CD 710, which shows the passenger survey, which states an 18.8 share for access by bus and coach and 3% for rail. And we're just wondering whether or not there's been any double counting there, because if you come by rail to Western Parkway or Nailsea or Bristol, you then have to get on a bus or take a taxi. Now, I don't know what the survey questions were, but if the passengers were counted in the rail figures and then counted in the bus figures, it would change the modal split. So I do think that needs to be examined. And I think there's just been, my next point is the 2012 survey, CAA survey passengers, which shows a modal split of 18.1 for public transport in CD 7.09. And it's funny numbering of pages, but I think that's an anomaly because, but there is a mistake. It does actually say that the public transport in 2012 was 18.1, in which case it hasn't grown at all. So I think that needs to be checked.
Thank you.
Have you checked it?
Well, it's in the table. It's in the table there. Yes, we can look it up now. It's page 39, numbered as 38. And I just can't explain it because I thought it was different.
You have no means of checking that yourself. You're just reliant on the information given in the table, is what you're saying.
Yes, yes.
But
I mean,
it
there's
seems
no way.
anomalous to you.
Yeah, I mean, there must be a typo or something, but I think it is worth looking at. So I think the modal split is going to be, I know it will be in the conditions in the 106 agreement, is going to be exceptionally important to whether or not sustainable transport policies are actually made.
So far as your general conclusions then in relation to transport and the proposal, can you summarise those, please?
Well, basically, whatever happens, there is going to be no mass transit until at least mid-2030s or near 2040s, if there's money prevailing. The mass transit will bring mass environmental challenges as well, so whether it's feasible or not. So we are in a very tight situation with the roads network that's creaking at the seams, and really there should be no expansion because of the traffic situation, because we only have A roads and rural lanes.
And is there anything that you've seen that would resolve that problem, especially in the context of adding over the existing situation where there were approximately 9 million passengers per annum, increasing that potentially up to 12 million?
Not really, no. The one thing we do want, and all the parishes fully support, is multi-storey car park 2 and the public transport interchange. The public transport interchange is looked at as not as just bringing passengers into the airport and taking them home, but as possibly a public transport interchange for people who live in the Chew Valley and south of the airport to come into the airport, perhaps drop off or cycle in and then go into Bristol and Bath. We've found it very, very disappointing that it has not been delivered as expected, because it was expected for at least 9 million passengers. This has to be conditioned, and it has to be conditioned before anything else happens, and it should actually be built for 10 million passengers as expected under the previous planning consent.
So just to look at potential conditions, I think you've already said that you think the modal split is not ambitious enough. It should be increased.
Yeah, it should be at least 30%.
You've also, I think, both today and when you previously gave evidence, talked about removal of permitted development rights. You're now talking about a condition that requires the multi-storey car park 2 and the public transport interchange to be delivered when or before, ahead of the growth to the 10 million passengers per year.
Yeah.
Are there other conditions you think are relevant to transport that ought to be considered?
Well, in this application, there's multi-storey car park 3. This ought to be put in to come in sooner rather than later, and it should be phased to at least 11 million passengers, just so that car parking on the green belt is not used.
And in relation to greenbelt parking, have you any proposals so far as conditions relevant to that?
Well, I'm a bit frightened that I might be straying into other territory again. So, yes, we do. I mean, we have to have the phasing of any replacement or mitigation land to be in place and mature before the release of any greenbelt land. So that needs to have a time scale. And you have to look at the replacement land when you're taking out trees, which you're doing, and preparing that, will take at least 5 years.
I think you've added that in for completeness while these areas are being considered. I think there'll be legal submissions on that based around the case of Orleans, which deals with compensation and the efficacy of it and when it ought to be put in place. But that is a matter for legal submissions, I think, later.
Okay.
Are there any other conditions you think are relevant?
Not at the moment, but if I think of any, I'll bring them up on Friday.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a couple of questions, just straighten out some confusion I have. I'm just not quite clear in my mind as to what your position is if the panel were minded to approve the airport's appeal in terms of the A38 improvements, because you seem to suggest you didn't believe that they would solve anything or resolve any of the traffic issues. And a similar question was put to one of the witnesses earlier. So is it the PCAA's view that those, if permission is granted, that those improvement works are unnecessary?
We haven't.
I know you wouldn't. I know you don't want it, the airport to expand. We take that as a given. We understand that position. But I'm saying in the scenario where the panel were to grant planning permission, what is your view then on whether the road improvements are necessary or not?
There are obviously there's heavy congestion around the airport. But whether these proposals will actually resolve them, we don't believe they will, because we think it's just displacing traffic elsewhere. As I highlighted, the Churchill traffic lights, and you've got the Barrow traffic lights, and you've got the Brockley-Coombe on the A370 at the other end traffic lights. The West Lane, which you brought up the other day, is a lane, and people will just turn on that quicker to get through to Magna. All we're doing is just pushing the traffic out quicker. We're not actually solving the problems because there's more cars on the roads.
So they're unnecessary then?
Well, yes, I think that they're unnecessary.
Right. Okay. Can you understand the position that we're in as inspectors, because we've had a very detailed transport assessment that's looked at that junction along with a whole host of transport professionals that have agreed to it. Appreciate the council now take a different view on it, but the council and those saying that those improvements are not going to solve anything have not given us an alternative assessment. It's very difficult for us as a panel.
Well, I mean, one of the things is there are the experts, but there's been actually no web tag analysis done on any of this progress. And you have to look at the A38 MRN scheme, and that's called a major road network scheme. And if it's a major road network scheme, a web tag analysis should have been produced, which we would actually see whether it benefits cyclists, whether it benefits walkers. And then the parishes could actually go and make an informed opinion on it. And we haven't had that, so it's exceptionally very hard to comment on it.
Okay.
I mean, there is so much traffic, really, as Dr. Fox states, it should be enough to dismiss the appeal, or we would like it to think it would be, or one of the biggest contributory factors.
Just on parking then, just so I understand the position on parking, you said there should be no expansion of the car parks in the Greenbelt. I think that was what you said. At all. I think it wasn't predicated on before the multi-storey car parks. You just said no Greenbelt parking. I mean, has that been thought, because early on in the inquiry we heard from quite a number of PCAA witnesses about, time and time again, about the problems of unauthorised parking.
Yeah, that's true.
Time and time again, so we've heard about that. So if the car park isn't extended, the low-cost parking isn't extended into the Greenbelt, that's going to have a catastrophic impact, isn't it, on a problem that an already bad problem from what we're told from local residents.
But we accept that there is some, and there will always be some passengers who will avoid paying. And so the problem will always be there. So we would like the appeal dismissed so the problem doesn't get worse.
No.
Because we don't want any car parking on the greenbelt either.
Yeah. But if the appeal is allowed, is your position that as inspectors that we should dismiss that element of the parking on the greenbelt and just let's see what happens effectively?
I think you should dismiss car parking on the greenbelt. And I think the parishes will support that.
And the local community will be prepared to accept the consequences of that.
Well, I'm hoping, I would like to think that the public transport modal split would be put much higher and that the bus fares would be cheaper so that the problem wouldn't arise.
Appreciate that, yeah. Okay. Fine, all right. Ms Noble.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Ms Byrne.
Hello.
You've already given evidence to this inquiry in the Noise Week about a range of concerns from the parishes. I won't ask you any of the same questions. I think you were asked some questions mainly on noise, but on a few other matters as well. As with the other witnesses this afternoon, you're not claiming to be an expert in highways or transport, so I'm not going to go through any detailed points about the transport assessment or anything like that, if that's okay. Section 3 of your proof, you deal with traffic. We already heard in the first week of the inquiry various concerns from members of the parishes about their experiences. I'm just going to pick up a few points that you raise in this section. Paragraph 3.3, you refer to the Bristol Clean Air Zone, and in the last line you say that no assessment has been given on the potential impact on airport-related and other traffic distribution or on air quality, which all remains unknown. The details of the Bristol Clean Air Zone were published after BAL's original planning application, weren't they?
Yeah.
And Mr. Witchell's evidence for this inquiry contains an analysis now of the implications of the Clean Air Zone in highways terms, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I wrote this because we all had the same deadline, so I didn't see what Mr. Witchell said when I wrote it.
I quite understand. Paragraphs 3.4 to 3.5 of your proof, you make a point about further airport growth plus new housing development and the clean air zone, leaving that aside, will increase traffic and congestion through the villages.
Correct.
You can't really blame the airport for allocation of new development, can you?
No, I'm not blaming the airport, but I think we have to accept that the airport and housing developments share the same road, and that the airport don't have absolute right over that road, that there's commuters going to work, there's ambulances taking people to hospital, and that the highways and roads are public goods.
Nor is it the airport's responsibility that, as you point out, residents of North Somerset have the most cars of any area in the southwest. That's not a matter that's the airport's responsibility, is it?
It isn't, but if you increase passengers and you continually grow, it's going to be very hard for North Somerset to have any statistics which are lower on travel, because the travel figures will go into those, I think.
And the highways modelling, very detailed highways modelling that's been carried out by experts in relation to this proposal takes into account traffic growth from known developments, doesn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
So that's all been assessed.
I think so.
And PCAA, no one on behalf of PCAA has undertaken a technical assessment of any of that.
That's correct.
Paragraph 3.6 of your proof, you make a point that Bristol has one of the worst public transport mode shares. I'm sure you were listening to the evidence this afternoon, where we went to table 6.3 and Mr. Witchell's evidence. Because of that, I don't propose to go back to that, save to put to you that Bristol's bus, coach and rail public transport mode share is better than Cardiff, Birmingham and Manchester, isn't it?
Well, well, I did hear Elizabeth on taxis, so and she would differ with you. But the point I'm trying to get to the inspectors is the situation is dire now with the 21.8% modal split. And we only have A roads and rural lanes. So even if we haven't got the worst public transport now, we're better than Cardiff and we're better than Birmingham, it's still not good enough to resolve the congestion on the local roads because the road network is totally inadequate. And that's the point. So the road network isn't up to increase passengers, even if we increase the modal split, we'll still be at capacity.
Thank you. Next point, at paragraph 3.7 of your proof, you say that the airport infrastructure is being examined by the Western Gateway Sub-Regional Transport Body made up of the local authorities and the West of England Combined Authority. You refer to the minutes of that organisation as showing a recognition that connectivity to the airport is poor. If we look at those minutes at CD 5.31, do you have access to that?
It will take me ages to get that one up. I haven't got that one paper up. Well, just tell me what it says and then I'll believe you.
I will do.
5.31.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
In those minutes, the only reference to accessibility to the airport is on page 9. At the top of the first full paragraph on page 9, it's recording a councillor's comments, and it says, he, the councillor, referred to the recent North Somerset decision to confirm the refusal of the airport expansion planning application, noting that part of the reasoning for that decision was based around the lack of sustainability in terms of access to the airport. So those minutes are just recording the councillor talking about the North Somerset decision. That's not recording a finding that transport to the airport is poor.
I think there is somewhere in one of those papers that actually says that, but I take what you say.
I'm very happy for you to...
Yeah, if it's there, then we need to find it. Otherwise, you'll have to withdraw that comment. I mean, quite happy to go through it. If you think it's there, let's find it.
Okay. Can I send it in?
Well, not...
Because I've got my computer at home, because I've got my iPad, because my computer's so heavy.
Not really, no.
Oh, right.
It's not really how it works.
I
mean, maybe Mr. Morehouse, under re-examination,
Wait a minute.
can find it, possibly.
So I mean, if you want to be
Well,
taken to it, the next paragraph
It
talks
doesn't
about
matter.
travel having to be sustainable and the like. almost self-evident because
I don't mind the comment being withdrawn because I know that everybody knows that the situation of the road network.
Well, maybe when Mr Morehouse comes back, he can refer us to the other parts of that he thinks are relevant, and we will obviously have a read through that. I must admit this isn't a document that I've got to yet. It's on my list, not got that far down. Sorry, Miss Noble.
Thank you, sir. Section 4, car parking in surrounding villages. It's a significant issue of concern for the PCAA, isn't it, in terms of the impact of people parking away from the airport?
Yes, it is.
We heard lots of evidence from members of the PCAA in the first week, and that issue was also identified as a matter of concern by the council in the officer's report, wasn't it?
Yes.
In your paragraph 4.1, you identify that a reason people park in the surrounding villages is to avoid paying parking charges.
Correct.
You also recognise that higher charges may lead to more people parking away from the airport. That's at your paragraph 5.3.3.3. We can go there if you want.
Yep.
So just so I'm clear, would the PCAA support higher charges for parking or lower charges for parking?
Higher charges.
That would rather seem to cut across the strategy of seeking to reduce the impact on local residents in the parishes as a result of this unauthorised car parking and waiting in the villages.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to weigh up saving the green belt from more car parking. And the only way you can do that is if you have a higher transport modal split. So you have higher car parking costs without the green belt, which pushes people onto public transport.
But also push people into the villages where members of the PCAA live. That's right, isn't it?
That is correct. And we've said that there will always be some passengers who will seek to avoid paying costs and airport car parking costs. And that happens now with low-cost car parking.
Now, I understand your view on the effectiveness of this will differ, but you do understand it, don't you, that the airport's intention through its parking strategy, one of the objectives is to seek to reduce car parking away from the airport and the effects that we've heard about in the first week of the inquiry. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Also at your paragraph 5.3.3.3, you do identify that one means of reducing this effect is public transport plus enforcement. Yes. If we just look at Mr. Witchell's proof of evidence, just to see what BAL are proposing, at page 21, do you have access to that, Ms. Byrne?
Page 21.
Yes. Just let me know when you're there.
Yeah, on page 21.
You'll see figure 4.6 is the modal hierarchy. So consistently with what you propose, we have public transport at the top. And if we look at paragraph 4.5.4 at the bottom of that page.
Sorry, it's just gone blank. I'll have to start again. So page 21, yeah.
Yes. 4.5.4.
It's gone blank again. Sorry, it won't bring it up.
Mr. Morehouse, do you have a paper copy or?
Well, can you read out?
Yes. At paragraph 4.5.4, Mr. Witchells outlines the proposed measures that will be included in the ASAS. And in that list, if we turn on to page 22 and 23, we have a number of public transport improvements that are being proposed. That's in line with what the PCAA would support, isn't it?
Yes, things like an enforcement officer and things like that.
Yes, well, I was just referring to public transport improvements for now,
yes, yeah.
But you're quite right. On page 23, it's the fourth bullet point for anyone following. It's local parking controls. It talks about the ongoing commitment to providing funding, resourcing, coordinating discussions with local parish councils and stakeholders, and the proposal to contribute money towards a dedicated airport parking enforcement officer over 5 years. So that's consistent with what the PCAA supports, as you explained in paragraph 5.3.3.3 of your proof.
Yeah.
Thank you. Back to your proof, section 5. Greenbelt and Silver Zone car parking. In paragraph 5.1, you refer to Lulsgate House.
Yeah.
Now, that development's not a matter for this inquiry to consider, is it?
No, but it was a point that we bring out whenever we can, because it was under permitted development rights, and it's a landscape scar, and there was nothing the parishes could do about it, and it's caused a lot of resentment within the communities.
The PCAA's concern, as I understand it, is the development of a 3-storey building on the south side of the airport and the impact that has on the rural landscape. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, and also it should have been in the north side and 2 stories, because you put in it under permitted development regulations when it was supposed to be, the planning consent was for it on the north side in the inset.
At paragraph 5.4 of your proof and 5.6, you make various points about multi-storey car park, and as you just explained in your examination in chief, I think, the PCAA's preference is for multi-storey car park over additional surface level car park in the Silver Zone.
That's right.
But am I right in understanding that PCAA would not support further multi-storey car parks on the south side of the airport?
Yes, you're correct. We wouldn't.
For the same reasons that you have concerns about the impact on the landscape from Lulsgate House?
Yeah, it's greenbelt land. It would compromise the openness of the greenbelt.
And in terms of multi-storey car parking generally, I don't understand the PCAA's position that there should be further multi-storey car parking in general, either on the north side or on the south side.
We will support car parking on the north side.
You haven't
in the inset.
Sorry.
No, well, some multi-storey car parking. If you want to build more multi-storey car park 2 and the public transport interchange are all on the north side in the inset, and we fully support that. If you want to extend that and put the multi-storey car park 3 or multi-storey car park 4 next to them, that would be fine.
The PCA haven't, I don't think, carried out any assessment of the landscape impacts of adding an additional multi-storey car park or decked parking on the north side.
No, we haven't.
Final section, Miss Byrne. Conditions, section 10 of your proof. You've made a number of points in your examination in chief about conditions that the PCAA would like to see. I believe we are holding a conditions session in terms of highways and transport at the end of this week. Is the PCAA going to be available then for discussions of those?
Yes, we are.
Good.
Paragraph 10.1, you make a point about the airport being able to easily escape the strictures of planning conditions, and you use the non-delivery of the public transport interchange and MSCP 2 as an example. You do understand that there was a formal application to vary condition 7 that was attached to the earlier planning permission to allow the Silver Zone seasonal car park to come into use before the multi-storey was in operation. That was a formal process that was gone through, wasn't
Yes,
it?
we accept that, but we believe there's uncertainty about the delivery of this because we know that the airport have actually submitted under public development regulations for the public transport interchange to be changed, to change the location. We know that North Somerset Council have just refused that, and that's where we are on that. But nobody's actually commented when the multi-storey car park is actually going to be built. So, I mean, you keep saying that it's in the 106 agreement, but you actually haven't, you said it to Lisbeth, you said that in the 106 agreement, the multi-storey car park and the public transport, there is a commitment to deliver it. Well, we would like to know actually what date, you potentially saying that by 2026 we'll now be at 10 million passengers. So are we going to expect it in 2024, 25 or 26? It'd be quite nice to have some information, please.
Miss Beth, I'll make sure that that's covered and there's clarity on exactly when that will be delivered in terms of the obligation for you and for the inspectors.
That would be helpful, thank you.
That draft section 106 is available for anybody to see, isn't it? So
It is available.
yeah.
Oh, right.
It is.
Can we see an update?
Familiarise yourself with that by Friday.
Yeah, but can we have an updated one, please?
Sorry.
Can we have I think it was being updated or something, we're waiting for it?
I understand the most up-to-date version has been circulated already.
Yes.
Oh, right, okay.
Talk to Mr. Morehouse, and Miss Morehouse, if you don't have it, then obviously get in contact with Miss Vincent.
At paragraph 10.6 of your proof, you state that the PCAA would be seeking a 25% modal split for public transport. I don't think it would be controversial. The commitment that's proposed would see 2.5% increase, and that's above the actual baseline level.
Yeah.
That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I can say, that's what you're offering. I can say that when I wrote this, I was using the 12.5, then it went to 17.5, and now it's at 21.8. So the figures have changed on the modal split quite a lot from the application.
I quite understand. But just taking...
But we're asking in the condition for at least 8% for reasons I've just given.
Well, I'm just, for now, looking at the position in your original proof, which was 25%. And if you take the CAA 2019 data of 21.8%, adding 2.5% gets us to 24.3%, doesn't it? So that's quite close to what you were originally seeking.
But I was working on a much lower baseline, so I'm sticking with the 8%, so that we go towards 30.
So if we look at your rebuttal, I think this is where the updated position is. I understand the PCA, sorry.
Wait a minute, I've got my rebuttal here somewhere.
Page number. Oh, it's only...
It's page 3, I'm just looking at paragraph 4A.
Oh, this up here.
Paragraph 4A.
Right, yep.
So this is where you set out the new position of seeking 30% in terms of public transport mode share. Any target has to be realistically achievable, doesn't it?
Yes, I agree. And as I've said earlier, we're in a decade where we have to really change. So we've got to be more ambitious in achieving sustainability, which means upping the current targets which you're suggesting.
Absolutely, but a target's not going to mean anything if it can't actually be achieved.
I think this could be achieved if you don't park on the green belt and you raise your car parking fees so that people think, oh, it's too expensive to drive and car park, we'll take the bus. And if the bus services are laid on, I think people will take them. People are, I believe, are willing to change their behaviour, but we have to encourage them to do that. And by encouraging them to do that, you need to change the modal split to a higher figure.
Absolutely, Ms Byrne. It's not just a matter of changing the modal split, though. There are measures that are going to be put in place to encourage people to take public transport. And in Mr Witchell's evidence, he sets out an analysis in terms of what can be achieved from the measures that are proposed, that are viable. You or anyone on behalf of the PCAA haven't set out an analysis of what is achievable in terms of a public transport modal share, have you?
No, but I wouldn't expect a community group to do that. We're a working party with lots of different expertise, and we haven't got the expertise to cover all eventualities. What we expect is the airport to put alternatives and solutions forward.
I understand. So in terms of detailed analysis of what is achievable, that's in Mr Witchell's evidence. You don't give any substantive evidence to counteract that, so that's where that analysis is. I understand what you're saying about being a local group. Just staying in your rebuttal, paragraph 4B, you make a point about the parking demand study being based on a modal share of 12.5. The parking demand study has obviously been updated, and that is still using the same methodology as in the parking demand study. And there was cross-examination of Mr Collis on this earlier, so I would prefer not to go back to those documents, but just to clarify, the parking demand study uses actual parking demand, doesn't it?
If you say so. Okay, yeah.
So it is consistent with the latest CAA data because it uses actual data about passengers parking. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm happy to go to the documents if necessary.
I'm not sure what you're trying to get at, actually.
In terms of you saying that the modal share was 12.5%,
Yeah.
I'm just clarifying that the modal share that was used is the actual modal share.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, okay. And that's in the CAA 2019 data, that's the 21.8% that we've looked at.
Yes.
Just last few points. Paragraph 4D, you refer to the clean air zone again. You talk about increasing congestion as a result of that. It's for Bristol City Council, isn't it, to have considered the benefits or the impacts of the clean air zone?
Yes, it is Bristol City Council. One of the things they did say when I read the document, I did go and look at it, is that they didn't think there was going to be so much traffic pushed out to the outer edges, but there will be some. So there will be a few more. I don't know how many, but there will be a slight knock-on impact.
And just finally, paragraph 6 of your rebuttal. You refer to the A38 MRN consultation. We've heard today about the similarities between the proposal by the airport for the A38 works and the council's MRN scheme. I think I understand the PCAA opposes both the MRN scheme and any A38 works that BAL are proposing. Is that right?
We are hoping that the appeal is going to be dismissed. Obviously, if it is not, you will carry on and do those works because it's the only way you'll get the passengers into the airport.
Thank you, that's all from me.
Mr. Morehouse, do you want some?
Yes, please, if I may. When you were being asked questions about the modal split, I think we were told that what you are putting forward, what you've suggested as a modal split is unachievable, effectively by the airport authority. Inevitably, that will mean, and we can do the maths if we want to, if we have an increase from the current 9 million passengers per annum to 12 million passengers per annum, and we don't have the change in modal shift, there'll be a significant increase in traffic on the roads. What impact is that going to have on the people who live in the area?
Well, I think we heard from the local witnesses that the traffic will cause, well, first of all, it will cause more noise at night because there'll be more traffic at night. There'll be more tailbacks through the days. It will be hard to get out of their houses, out of the junctions of West Lane onto the A38, for instance. It generally makes life much more difficult. When there's an accident, and there was one I think 2 weeks ago, and I don't know whether it was what the accident was about, but it caused a terrific tailback and thousands of cars going down Long Lane opposite the airport to get it to Winford, to cut across, to get into Bristol. And it was apparently horrendous. I had one resident write and email me about it.
Thank you. Now, you were asked some questions, I think, about one of the paragraphs in your statement, which I think you, about the minutes of the West of England Combined Authority meeting, that I think you said you couldn't find the detail of, you didn't have the document in front of you. Can I just read you a passage, because I don't think you've got it. And this is the paragraph that was referred to earlier on, the first full paragraph on page 9 of document 5.31. Reads, Councillor Davis indicated his agreement with Councillor Romero's comments. He referred to the recent North Somerset decision to confirm the refusal of the airport expansion planning application, noting that part of the reasoning for that decision was based around the lack of sustainability in terms of access to the airport. He noted the comments in public statements of Tony Lloyd about increasing rail services, but it was important to recognise that the option for this were limited at this point. The region also faced a housing crisis and more homes would be needed to be built. The suggestion from some people that no new roads should be built was difficult to achieve in practice, given the most public transport infrastructure currently needed to be provided through a roads-based system. Any additional spend on roads moving forwards should be led from North Somerset perspective by public transport demands. A nuanced approach was required to prioritise public transport needs in terms of the road network, and he supported the current plan on the basis it was very much an interim document, that work would be taken forward on the next improved version of the plan. So that was the minute of a discussion in that meeting. Does that accord with your recollection of that?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Okay, so it was a councillor who said that, but it just highlights that the road network around Bristol Airport is totally inadequate for 12 million passengers. It is basically A roads and rural lanes.
We go on because that set of minutes refers to addendums being made to the joint local transport plan, number 4, and we can, if I read again the one of the amendment number 1, the first minor amendment is to add a new paragraph on page 6 of the document in its opening heading, detailed climate change and challenges ahead, to be titled JLP 4, TP4 and the Paris Agreement, and read, in line with and taking account of the Paris Agreement, the Joint Local Transport Plan 4 is fully committed to reducing carbon. The Joint Local Transport Plan 4 has a significantly positive role to play in meeting UK's international obligations through providing a well-connected and sustainable transport network, which accelerates the shift towards low-carbon trips, supporting sustainable development and the take-up of ultra-low emission vehicles to decarbonise transport. In many respects, with commitment to to be carbon neutral by 2030, the Joint Local Transport Plan 4 goes beyond the Paris Agreement. Looking ahead, the next Joint Local Transport Plan, as outlined above, will serve to strengthen this role, as described in the following section. Central government will be expected to play its role. That amendment, I think, was, the minutes show, as being unanimously passed by everyone on that authority. And it talks about the requirements of providing a well-connected and sustainable transport network to accelerate the shift towards low-carbon trips. Is that essentially what you were talking about as to the PCAA's position in relation to the provision of public transport and car parking?
Well, it certainly is, yes, because it's the way forward, yes.
Thank you. No, I've no further questions.
Thank you, Miss Byrne. Right, I'm assuming we don't have Mr. Witchell's.
Sir, our preference would be to start Mr. Witchell's evidence tomorrow morning.
That's fine.
It had been timetabled a bit later in the week, so...
That's fine, no problem.
Thank you.
Yes, hand up at the back.
On behalf of the PCAA, could I just check about the Section 106 agreement, please?
Where to find it, or...?
Not where to find it. We, on the deadline to submit the PCAA's and third parties' comments on the conditions, we submitted a table with the conditions, but also our comments on the Section 106 in an email as well. I just wanted to make sure that you had that, and if you don't, I'm happy to resubmit it so that you do, and then also to ask North Somerset and the airport whether there's been a more recent Section 106 since that deadline, which I think was the 15th of July, I think, so, because I haven't seen one, so.
I think, I'm going from memory here, but I think the July edition is the one that we've seen. And I think, wasn't there a comment to the effect from the airport that there are some tweaks to it, but nothing substantial?
So I think the July version is the latest version.
Yeah.
Sorry, so just going to chip in. I don't want to confuse matters further, but I will. I think that's right in terms of what's been shared, but that's not to say that discussions haven't gone further between the appellant and ourselves. So I suspect that everything you've heard is correct in terms of what's out there, but there may be additional matters that I certainly know have been going back and forth at various stages that we probably need to do a bit of an update on. So I'll speak to my team to see if we can bottom out the position there. And if there are, we'll let everybody know.
Yeah, I mean, that would be helpful if there are, because I've looked at the July version, albeit a while ago now. If there are any updates to that, can you put them in big yellow highlighting so I don't have to try and compare the two versions?
Yes, definitely. That's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Davis.
For information, we've just sent an email to Joanna asking for the 106 agreement and conditions. So,
Okay, I think that's been received. So
thank you.
So just to clarify, do you need me to resubmit that email so everybody's got it? The one where we've commented on the section 106?
Right, I mean, I saw at the back of the room that the programme officer is saying that she's received various emails. What I'm becoming a bit concerned about is, where are we now, Wednesday afternoon, which version of the conditions are we going to be talking about on Friday? When are we going to get them and from whom? And yes, you were obviously saying just earlier that we could look at an updated 106 with some highlighting. We've also obviously got comments coming in from various parties on the conditions and the 106. I'll be honest, I haven't seen them. If they're recent, I've not seen them. If they're comments, there were some tables, weren't there, that were circulated 3 or 4 weeks ago. Those certainly I've seen. But if there are more recent comments, I haven't seen them.
Sorry, our comments were submitted on the deadline in July, so hopefully you would have seen those.
If they're those comments, then yes, we've got them. If there was anything more recent, we haven't. There shouldn't be, to be honest. But
So the position on the conditions is slightly different, in a more positive way, I should say. And that is that in just the same way as we provided you with a table on noise and air quality, we've, on this side of the room, have produced that today, and that's gone over, not that long ago, but it went over this afternoon to the appellant. So we're hoping that they'll fill in that bit and you can have a comparable table. Now, if needs be, and with a little bit of work in the permitting time, I'm sure PCAA, etc., the other parties, can, if need be, add a column like you had before, because there's not a lot of conditions, and that's perfectly achievable in the time that we have before Friday.
absolutely.
But that's slightly different to the 106 issue, which I mentioned before.
So just to, sorry, I was going to say that I'm aware that today we've spent some time on effectively asking questions about 106 agreements because of the vacuum, if I can put it that way. We are not party to it, and that maybe, in fact, it saves a lot of time if we can see where people are, and that maybe that there aren't issues to cover.
I mean, the only other comment I'd make is that obviously we're going to have what I suspect will be a fairly short session on Friday on conditions and the obligation, but it's only the first session on that. So if anybody is slightly disadvantaged by perhaps not having looked at the latest version or whatever, I don't think that's a problem, because we'll be coming back for what would normally be the full conditions session in X weeks' time. So we're having a sort of first stab at the whole thing on Friday, as we did whenever that was, some weeks ago, in relation to noise. So I'm quite easy about what I'm hearing, because nobody's going to be left behind, as it were. And if anybody does feel they haven't had a chance to look at these documents, we can do it again in a few weeks' time.
So we'll ensure that the most recent versions have been circulated and that you have the airport's comments as well.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, that can come in tomorrow, Thursday. There goes our evening. Okay, right, thank you very much.
Thank you. The inquiry is adjourned.